Education stakeholders in Idaho got a lot to dig into this legislative session, but the emphasis on education and funding from Governor Little and lawmakers, something most see as a positive thing. So that's one thing on the good side. But there's one area where advocates want your attention drawn: childcare and the costs that come with it. A report from Idaho First Steps Alliance indicates if lawmakers do not act on some funding mechanisms soon, childcare operations across Idaho could be in jeopardy. If even some of those businesses fail, though, you will know there's going to be fewer options out there for Idahoans who need and depend on childcare. Thus, the call out to lawmakers. Here's Joe Paris.
A new report from the Idaho First Steps Alliance is drawing attention to childcare costs in the Gem State. Advocates warn that if grant programs run by the Department of Health and Welfare expire at the end of the fiscal year, June of this calendar year, childcare businesses across Idaho could be forced into untenable situations.
The pandemic hit the childcare industry really hard, and they are really struggling to recover. There have been a few measures that have kept doors open over these last 3 years, but we have to continue to keep those going so that working families have access to childcare. Because as we all know, if you have small children, childcare is part of your village. You have to have childcare in order for your life to function.
Emily Allen is a policy associate for Idaho Voices for Children. She explains, if lawmakers do not renew remaining relief funding requested by Health and Welfare, childcare businesses will suffer massively.
And we've seen that these are businesses that are tough to keep afloat because of wages and really available resources to childcare in the state.
That's exactly right. It's a super fragile revenue stream. And during the pandemic, when there were closures, mandated closures and things like that, we saw childcare providers lose their revenue, just kind of fall out from under them. At the same time, parents are really not able to pay much more at this point. Childcare costs are very high. In many counties across the state, childcare for 2 kids exceeds what you would pay for housing. And we know that housing affordability across the state of Idaho is a big issue.
I've also read that some families spend more on childcare than they would on in-state college tuition.
That's exactly right. Yeah, you could be, at the beginning of your career, you're starting out your family and you're paying just as much as parents who are sending their kids off 20 years later to an in-state institution.
With that said, Allen says their research found that nearly 8 out of 10 childcare business owners in Idaho have used the grant programs to keep their doors open since the early months of the pandemic. In fact, 9 counties across Idaho saw every provider receive grant funding.
So with the ARPA funds, the Department of Health and Welfare was able to get some money into the pockets of childcare providers, help pay some wages, help pay for some business expenses. Sounds like that could expire this year.
It will expire this year unless legislators take action. So the spending authority is only extended from the Idaho legislature to June 30th, 2023, which is the end of this fiscal year, unless they take action this session to continue those really important grants that have kept doors open.
If those grants aren't renewed, I guess what happens?
Walkouts. Right? Closures, more closures. Childcare providers are very concerned that they're going to lose staff. They've been very open with their staff that they're not going to be able to continue those wage enhancement grants on their own. And so they're very concerned that they'll be unable to continue providing resources to their community.
A focus of Governor Brad Little's State of the State address centers on funding education in Idaho. An encouraging step, but that budget still needs legislative approval.
Governor Little, in his budget, says that he has $15 million for child care infrastructure. It doesn't seem like there's a specific detail right now. What does that amount mean to you? Is this $15 million towards infrastructure? I mean, I imagine it's a good thing.
It's a great thing. Yeah, it's additional funding for a program that was stood up last year under the Workforce Development Council that was for the Child Care Expansion Program, and it addresses this shortage issue. It starts to chip away at this lack of availability, and it's really important dollars that the child care industry needs to continue moving forward.
But is it enough to really fix the problem?
15 million on top of another 15 million from last year is a meaningful amount of money that we are very grateful to see on the table, for sure. Yes.
But still, the Department of Health and Welfare grants, I mean, does seem to be a major factor still?
Yeah, they're part and parcel, right? Because we want to stabilize the existing availability. We cannot risk losing more child care providers. We need to keep those open. But we also have to have another eye on expanding availability and lifting up new providers who want to come in and start a business in the state of Idaho, or existing businesses who have really strong reputations and want to expand seats and dip into finally provide services to their long wait lists. And so it's a twofold solution to this ongoing problem.
In the early days of the legislative session, it seems that lawmakers are pretty receptive to funding childhood education as well as education in general. And that's really what we're talking about when the budgets are being discussed in the early going. And Brian, I know some of our viewers at home, when we start talking about budgets, their eyes glaze over. They say it's boring stuff. But as the Joint Finance and Appropriation Committee starts to meet and they start to work on budgets, these are the type of implications that the boring stuff really has. The line items, the very specific programs, the funding, what's available to Idahoans. So it'll be very interesting to follow this story, and that's kind of what we're doing here today, Brian. We're kind of setting up this conversation for the legislative session. Of course, our team here has been following child care problems in Idaho for the last few years. It'll be interesting to see where this one goes.
I mean, if there's a surplus, I know a lot of people saying you can put the surplus toward this. I mean, that seems like an obvious where money is needed because, I mean, you don't want to skimp on who you pay to watch your children, right?
Yeah.
That's the biggest key of this is what you pay anybody to watch your kids.
At the same time, though, there's only so much to go around. You have roads you need to invest in. You have public education you need to invest in. The truth of the matter here is that something always loses out. What will it be? That's why you have to keep a close eye on the budgets.
All right. Yep. That's just getting going there at the State House. Thank you very much, Joe. And